So Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi was expected to announce members of the Executive Council for the province, but that briefing has been postponed to an unknown time. Meanwhile, there is no indication yet as to when President Cyril Ramaphosa will announce details of the Government of National Unity Cabinet. But joining me now to unpack all of this and really what it means for how those discussions are going, we are joined by Dr. Thozamile Botha, who's a research associate from the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Botha, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I actually just want to get some clarity, right, in how things work, essentially, right? Where is it true to say that at the moment we await the cabinet, but we don't have a cabinet at the moment?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, that is the case, because the president is obviously negotiating with the various political parties, and of course there will be bargaining for positions both at the cabinet level and of course in terms of chairs of committees and all of that, although that the latter part would be discussed at Parliament with the Speaker. But in terms of the cabinet positions, it's got to be rather distributed according to the votes that parties gained during the elections.
Yeah, but essentially what I was asking is that, you know, once the president takes that oath of office, as he did last week, Wednesday, until he appoints one, we essentially don't have a cabinet. And I think that that's an important point because it speaks to, okay, what is happening within our departments at the moment.
Well, according to the Constitution, I think these structures are only dissolved a day before the appointment of the new cabinet. So, in fact, if the president has not appointed anybody, then it means that the current executive committee is still in place.
Okay.
That's my knowledge.
So let's talk about the tightrope that the president is walking as we get closer and closer to, hopefully anyway, to him announcing that cabinet, where now you've got 10 parties that are part of this GNU. How difficult do you think that makes it, in your view, for them, for him then to decide who takes over what cabinet, and how important is it that he represent all, if not some of these parties?
What I know in terms of the Constitution, the allocation of posts should take into account the proportionate seats that the parties gained during the elections, and therefore the president will take that into account. Of course, there's going to be negotiations about which positions parties would want to gain. According to the Constitution also, if the president appoints deputy presidents, those presidents, their appointments should take into account the votes that the party won during the election. So that proportionality has got to be taken into account. And of course, normally there would be a threshold in terms of which, how many seats the parties have gained in the parliament, and therefore recognize the role that each party must be allocated in order to ensure that the constitutional provisions and the Bill of Rights are taken into account and are respected in terms of the oath that the members of parliament took during the 14th day after the elections.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point when you talk about proportionality, right, and whether or not the political parties involved understand that. I mean, for instance, we saw yesterday the expectation that the Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi was to announce the members of his executive council, that announcement being postponed. Some concerns about whether or not that executive council was going to be proportional in its, I suppose, the spacing out of some of those positions across the various political parties. What is the biggest challenge there? And I'm wondering if there is a clear line of communication that you see that might very well be problematic from the top of the ANC all the way down to what's happening in the provinces. Is there, in your view, a communication error about how this allocation is set to take place?
Well, my assumption is that the decisions taken at national level based on the founding document should cascade down to provinces and maybe later to local authorities. Therefore, some of the decisions may be at provincial level, might be delayed because maybe there's no agreement at national level about how the proportionality should be implemented.
Can we talk a little bit about the ministers that you're expecting that you're hoping to see make their way back into cabinet? And I think we need to talk a little bit about, really who should not be making their way back into that list, and also, who you think some of the new entrants could be, some sparks that you think we should be looking at.
Well, my expectation is that the ministers who have been identified, for example, by the Zondo Commission, would not be appearing in that list. That's my assumption. Whether that happens or not, that's a different story. Therefore, it is expected that ministers from the various political parties would take positions, some of which were held previously by the ANC members. So there's going to be a sharing of positions, and of course, some ministers will lose positions. I'm very careful not to be a sangoma and suggest that these are the following positions that would be occupied by which political parties, because that's also going to be determined by the number of votes parties gained and the strength that they would contribute to the GNU.
Yeah.
You see, the GNU is different from the coalitions that we've seen at local government level, because those coalitions were not based on any fundamental document that was a founding principles or enshrined the founding principles that parties must comply with in the governance of those state institutions.
Yeah. Can we talk about the importance of timing here? I mean, just how timely as these decisions need to be made and the implications of us not doing so speedily?
Well, it's very important. I mean, for me, it's urgent that the president must announce the cabinet to create stability and certainty for the country to move forward. Because as it stands now in this transition, it's difficult to know who is responsible for what, and if things don't go right, for example, who to point a finger at. So as it is, for any state to function efficiently and effectively, it's important that there is certainty as to who is in charge for the various portfolios. And therefore, for now, for me, I would say that the president, in fact, should have announced this either yesterday or not later than today, I presume.
Yeah, I think you talk about who needs to be responsible for various portfolios, and I immediately start thinking about how, for many South Africans watching, even where we saw the Premier postponing the announcement yesterday of Gauteng, a lot of, and this is of course people on social media and a few pundits saying, well, perhaps the consultations with other political parties have not been sufficient. And it's raised the question really about who within these negotiations is making those final decisions, who has the loudest influence. I mean, when we spoke to Rise Mzansi over the weekend, as they announced that they're joining the Government of National Unity, they spoke about how they don't have delusions of grandeur, knowing that they come in with really very little ability to negotiate and a lot, I suppose, a lot less sway than some political parties do. Who really has the biggest influence, do you think, within these negotiations? There's a sense by some saying that the DA needs to be consulted.
Well, it's clear that the largest political parties here in terms of voting strength is both the ANC and the DA. Because the DA is the second largest in terms of the votes gained. And therefore, those two parties would become very strong negotiators in this thing, in going forward. Now, of course, in a GNU, there has to be sufficient consensus if they can't reach an agreement. Now, sufficient consensus, it means that the parties that have got more than 60% of the seats, 60 of the seats, they must take decisions when it comes to sufficient consensus. Now, ideally, you would want all the political parties to have agreed on the points that are raised. At the end of the day, the right to appoint ministers vests with the president. Of course, after consultation with his executive deputies.
All right. Yeah, well, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Thozamile Botha, Research Associate from the University of Johannesburg, sharing his thoughts on where we are really as we await the president announcing our cabinet, also waiting for the Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi to announce his executive council as well.